Thomas Reed straightened his tie in the elevator mirror, mentally rehearsing the details from the dossier. Client 7734, preferences included classical music, intellectual conversation, and formal dining. No personal questions. No unexpected deviations from planned activities. The pay was triple his normal rate, enough to clear his student debt if the arrangement continued for the promised 6 weeks. The elevator stopped at the penthouse level of the Meridian Hotel. As the doors slid open, Thomas adjusted his expression to one of professional warmth. Companion services were legal but still carried stigma. He preferred the term, professional companion, to any alternatives. His job was to provide company, conversation, and attentiveness to clients who could afford discretion. The penthouse foyer was dimly lit. A voice called from deeper within, "Please come in, Mr. Reed. The light sensitivity migraine persists today. I hope the darkness doesn't trouble you." "Not at all," Thomas replied, moving forward with practiced ease. "I'm adaptable to my clients' needs." The woman sat in a high-backed chair, her face obscured by a sheer veil attached to an elegant hat. Her gloved hands rested in her lap. Something about her posture seemed slightly off, but Thomas couldn't place what. "Your references were impeccable," she said. Her voice had a musical quality, with an accent he couldn't quite place. "You understand discretion." "It's the foundation of my service," Thomas replied, taking the seat across from her when she gestured. "May I address you by a name?" "You may call me Leora," she said after a moment's hesitation. Over the next 3 hours, Thomas followed Leora's carefully scripted evening. They dined on food delivered by hotel service, though Leora ate very little. They discussed Earth's classical composers. Bach seemed to fascinate her most. Throughout, she maintained her veil and never touched him, not even accidentally. This pattern repeated for 2 weeks. Thomas arrived each evening, followed Leora's structured plans, and departed with generous payment transferred to his account. Her questions grew increasingly specific about human emotions, connections, and relationships. It was as though she were conducting research rather than seeking companionship. On the 15th night, Thomas arrived to find the penthouse completely dark. "Leora," he called, concerned. "In here," her voice came from the terrace. "I've been watching the stars." Thomas carefully made his way through the darkened suite. The terrace doors stood open, and beyond them, Leora stood without her veil, her back to him. "The sky looks different from here," she said softly. "Different from where?" Thomas asked, approaching slowly. "From home," she replied. When she turned, Thomas froze. In the starlight, her features were almost human, but not quite. Her eyes were larger, irised in violet that seemed to reflect light like a cat's. Her skin had a subtle luminescence, and the structure of her face followed proportions that were hauntingly beautiful but unmistakably alien. Thomas's professional composure cracked. He stepped back reflexively, his heart hammering. "You weren't supposed to see," Leora said, her expression impossible to read. "I've made a mistake." "What, who are you?" Thomas managed. "I am what your people would call an ambassador," she replied. Though that term lacks precision. Thomas tried to process what he was seeing. "From where?" "A system your astronomers haven't properly catalogued yet." She moved toward him with that strange, fluid grace that had always seemed slightly off. "I've broken protocol by letting you see me. My colleagues will be displeased." Thomas should have run. Every instinct told him to leave, to forget, to pretend this had never happened. Instead, he found himself asking, "Why me? Why hire a companion?" Leora's expression softened into something recognizable, uncertainty. "I needed to understand human connection before the negotiations begin. My kind doesn't form bonds the way yours does. It's fascinating. Potentially dangerous. Definitely valuable." "Negotiations?" Thomas echoed. Yes, Leora said, her alien eyes searching his face. Regarding your planet's future. I have 2 days left to prepare my recommendation to the Council. She moved closer, her luminescent skin casting subtle light. Now you know what you were never meant to discover. What will you do with that knowledge, Thomas Reed? Thomas stared at Leora, his mind struggling to process what stood before him. The alien ambassador watched him with those unsettling violet eyes, waiting for his reaction with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. You're studying us, Thomas finally said, finding his voice. Like specimens. Not specimens, Leora corrected, her melodic voice softer now. Like potential allies, or threats. My species has observed Earth for centuries, but understanding grows increasingly urgent. Thomas moved to the terrace railing, needing physical support as his worldview crumbled around him. Why the secrecy? Why hire me instead of just? I don't know, interviewing willing participants? Leora joined him, keeping a careful distance. Observation without interference is our protocol. But it has limitations. Your species presents unique challenges, you say one thing while feeling another. You claim to value connection yet isolate yourselves. You profess peace while preparing for war. She gestured toward the night sky. The Council needs to understand if humans are ready. Ready for what? Thomas asked, dreading the answer. Contact. Integration. Earth sits at a critical juncture in space your people haven't mapped. 3 dominant factions in our alliance have different views on how to proceed with your world. The implication struck Thomas like a physical blow. And you're deciding our fate? Based on what? Conversations about Bach and dinners you barely touched? For the first time, Leora showed something like embarrassment. My methods were improvised. My predecessors studied your leaders, scientists, and warriors. I chose to study how humans connect when nothing is at stake but the connection itself. So you hired a professional companion. Thomas couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. I hired someone trained to observe, adapt, and connect without judgment, Leora corrected. Someone whose profession requires empathy without entanglement. I needed to understand how humans form bonds, real bonds, not the political alliances my colleagues document. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, pacing the terrace. This is insane. There are actual diplomats for this sort of thing. Diplomats show only what they wish others to see, Leora said. I needed authenticity. A thought struck Thomas. The payment, that currency must be worthless to you. The transaction was necessary for authenticity, she explained. But yes, what you call money holds different value to us. Thomas laughed humorlessly. So I've been unwittingly auditioning Earth for some galactic federation. Not unwittingly, Leora corrected. You showed genuine interest in my questions. You adapted to my needs without complaint. You demonstrated patience with what must have seemed strange requests. These qualities matter. And now? Thomas asked. Now that I've seen behind the veil, literally, what happens? Leora's expression shifted to something grave. Protocol dictates memory suppression before departure. Thomas felt cold fear crawl up his spine. You'd erase my mind? It's considered merciful, she said, though her tone suggested personal disagreement. The alternative is extraction, removing you from Earth entirely to preserve secrecy. Those are my only options. Forget or leave everything behind. Thomas leaned against the railing, suddenly exhausted. What exactly is at stake here, Leora? The Council convenes in 3 days. 3 factions will vote on Earth's designation, sovereign potential, resource territory, or quarantine zone. She stepped closer, her luminescence brightening with apparent emotion. My recommendation carries significant influence with the preservationist faction. And what's your recommendation so far? Thomas asked quietly. Incomplete, Leora admitted. Humans show remarkable capacity for connection and empathy. But also fear, prejudice, and violence when faced with difference. She studied his face intently. Your reaction now weighs heavily in my assessment. Thomas took a deep breath, steadying himself. You've been honest with me, even though it breaks your protocols. I appreciate that. He straightened his shoulders. So I'll be honest with you. I'm terrified. But also, fascinated. And I don't want to forget you, even if that's the sensible choice. Something like hope flickered across Leora's alien features. There is another option, though unorthodox, she said cautiously. You could continue assisting my research. Voluntarily. With full awareness. Helping you understand humanity better, Thomas said slowly. To potentially save Earth from becoming a resource territory or quarantine zone, whatever those mean. They mean precisely what you fear, Leora confirmed grimly. Thomas looked out at the city lights below, thinking of all the people living ordinary lives, completely unaware that their future hung in the balance of an alien council's vote. If I help you, he said finally, what guarantees do I have that you won't just erase my memory afterward anyway? None, Leora said simply. Except my word. Which, among my kind, is considered an unbreakable bond. Thomas turned back to her, studying the alien being who had hidden behind veils and careful scripts for weeks. Despite everything, he found he wanted to trust her. Then I'll take your word, he said, offering his hand in a very human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, Leora extended her gloved hand to meet his. The contact sent a strange, not unpleasant tingling sensation up his arm. The real work begins now, Thomas Reed, she said softly. And we have precious little time. Thomas barely slept that night after leaving Leora's penthouse. His mind replayed every interaction they'd had over the past 2 weeks, now colored by the knowledge of her true identity. Little oddities made sudden sense, her aversion to bright light, her curious questions about emotional responses, her perfect, almost too perfect posture. By morning, doubt had crept in. Had he hallucinated the entire encounter? The rational part of his brain insisted he must have. Yet the message waiting on his secure line confirmed everything. Observation continues today. Discretion paramount. Additional compensation authorized. L. Thomas arrived at the Meridian Hotel earlier than usual, his heart racing as the elevator ascended. When the doors opened, Leora was waiting, unveiled, her luminescent skin dimmed to pass as human under casual observation, though no one looking closely would be fooled. You came back, she said, genuine surprise in her voice. I said I would, Thomas replied. Though I half convinced myself I dreamed the whole thing. Leora gestured him inside, closing the door with a wave of her hand rather than touching it. Many humans would have refused to return. Fear of the unknown is a powerful deterrent in your species. Curiosity is stronger, Thomas countered, setting down his bag. Besides, if what you told me is true, Earth's future is at stake. That's worth a little fear. Your altruism is noted, Leora said, leading him to a room he hadn't seen before. Today we move beyond scripted interactions. The room held what appeared to be standard Earth technology, screens, computers, tablets, but subtle differences in their configuration suggested modifications. Data streams filled the displays, most in symbols Thomas couldn't decipher. These are reports from other observers, Leora explained. Analysis of human social structures, conflict patterns, resource consumption, technological progression. She gestured to a chair. I need you to help me contextualize what they're seeing. For hours, Thomas provided human perspective on the alien observations. He explained why humans formed national identities, why religious beliefs persisted alongside scientific advancement, why families remain central to human society despite inefficiencies. Your species is frustratingly paradoxical, Leora said as they paused. You create art celebrating peace while designing weapons. You teach empathy to your children while ignoring suffering outside your social circles. We contain multitudes, Thomas shrugged. Contradictions make us human. They make you dangerous, Leora countered, though without malice. The Resource Territory faction argues that unchecked human expansion will eventually threaten established galactic boundaries. Thomas frowned. We haven't even left our own solar system in any meaningful way. Your technological progression curve is nearly vertical compared to most species. Leora pulled up a chart showing exponential growth. What took others millennia, you accomplish in decades. A soft chime interrupted them. Leora stiffened, checking one of her devices. Proximity alert, she said, suddenly all business. Someone is scanning this location with technology beyond Earth's current capabilities. Another, like you? Thomas asked. Similar, but not allied, Leora began gathering data crystals from around the room. The Resource Territory faction would prefer my report never reach the Council. Thomas felt a wave of cold fear. Are we in danger? I am, Leora corrected, moving with urgent precision. You could still walk away, Thomas. Return to your life. This isn't your conflict. The offer hung between them. Thomas could feel the weight of the moment. This was his last chance to extract himself, to pretend none of this was happening. The sensible choice was clear. Yet he found himself helping Leora pack instead. If Earth's future is at stake, it's absolutely my conflict, he said firmly. What do we do? Leora studied him, those violet eyes unreadable. We relocate. My backup accommodations lack luxury but offer better security. Lead the way, Thomas said, shouldering one of the bags. They exited through a service entrance, Leora now wearing a hooded human coat that concealed her features. In the alley behind the hotel, Thomas spotted a dark sedan with tinted windows. Conventional transportation, Leora explained, noting his surprise. Less conspicuous than alternatives. As they drove through the city, Thomas noticed Leora checking various devices. How close are they? Close enough to concern me, she replied. The faction I represent values observation and preservation. The Resource Territory faction sees only potential and resources. And Earth is just another resource to them, Thomas concluded grimly. A particularly valuable one, Leora confirmed. Your biodiversity alone represents incalculable worth by galactic standards. The sedan turned down increasingly narrow streets until they reached an industrial area on the city's outskirts. The warehouse appeared abandoned, but Thomas suspected appearances were deceiving. Inside, the space was sparse but functional, monitoring equipment, sleeping arrangements, and what appeared to be communications technology unlike anything Thomas had seen. We have 48 hours before the council convenes, Leora said, activating systems with efficient movements. In that time, I must complete my assessment and transmit my recommendation. While evading whoever's looking for you, Thomas added. Precisely. Leora turned to him, her expression solemn. Your decision to remain involved has changed variables in my analysis, Thomas. Few species would risk themselves for an outsider with no guaranteed reward. Thomas smiled wryly. Maybe we're worth saving after all. Perhaps, Leora agreed, the ghost of a smile crossing her alien features. Though your decision also confirms human impulsivity and poor risk assessment. Before Thomas could respond, alarms blared from Leora's equipment. Her expression shifted to one of alarm. They found us faster than anticipated, she said, moving to a console. We need to. The warehouse doors burst open with a deafening crash. Blinding light flooded the warehouse as three figures entered, humanoid but clearly not human. Their movements were too fluid, their proportions subtly wrong beneath what appeared to be tactical gear. Emissary Leora, called the tallest figure in accented English. Your observation period is terminated by order of Resource Director Novan. Thomas felt Leora's hand close around his wrist, pulling him toward the back of the warehouse. Secondary exit, she whispered. Move quietly. The human subject will remain for processing, the alien called out. Resistance is counterproductive. Thomas followed Leora through a maze of crates and equipment, his heart hammering in his chest. Processing doesn't sound good, he muttered. It isn't, Leora confirmed grimly, tapping a sequence on her wrist device. A section of wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage. They'll extract all information about our interactions, then erase your memory, crudely, without concern for collateral damage. They slipped through the opening just as energy pulses struck the wall behind them. The passage sealed automatically, plunging them into darkness broken only by Leora's faint bioluminescence. Can they track us? Thomas asked as they hurried through the tunnel. Not immediately. This passage is shielded. Leora's voice was tight with concentration. But they have resources. The delay won't last long. The tunnel emerged into an underground parking facility where a different vehicle waited, something like a motorcycle but with remarkable differences in design. Leora gestured for Thomas to climb on behind her. Hold tightly, she instructed. This transport moves differently than Earth vehicles. Thomas had barely secured his arms around her waist when the machine surged forward with impossible acceleration, yet without the expected G-forces. They shot out of the garage and onto the night streets, weaving through traffic with preternatural precision. Where are we going? Thomas called over the strange, almost musical hum of the engine. To complete my mission, Leora replied. I've lost access to my primary transmission equipment, but there's a backup relay in the mountains. I must submit my assessment before the council convenes. They left the city behind, the strange vehicle climbing into the foothills with ease. Thomas found himself holding Leora closer than strictly necessary, struck by the surreal reality of his situation. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been paying off student loans. Now he was fleeing alien pursuers with an extraterrestrial diplomat. They're following, Leora announced suddenly, checking something on her wrist display. Multiple pursuit vehicles. Can we outrun them? Not indefinitely. This transport prioritizes stealth over speed. She took a sharp turn onto a barely visible forest road. We need to reach the relay point before they intercept us. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Thomas felt the temperature dropping. The forest grew denser, moonlight filtering through branches to cast strange patterns on the ground. Despite everything, he found himself admiring the beauty of the night, perhaps more intensely knowing what was at stake. You're remarkably calm, Leora observed during a moment of relative quiet. Most humans would be in psychological distress. Thomas laughed softly. Oh, I'm terrified. But panic wouldn't help, would it? No, she agreed. Adaptive response is preferable. They reached a clearing high in the mountains, where Leora stopped the vehicle and quickly dismounted. The relay is here, she said, moving toward what appeared to be an ordinary boulder. I need time to prepare and transmit my findings. How much time? Thomas asked, scanning the dark forest around them. 20 minutes minimum, Leora answered, placing her palm against the stone. A section of it reconfigured, revealing complex technology within. Can you watch the approach? Alert me if you see any lights or movement. Thomas nodded, taking position at the edge of the clearing where he could observe the road they'd traveled. The night was eerily quiet except for the wind through the pines. Leora, he called softly after a few minutes. I need to ask, what exactly is your recommendation going to be? Her hands paused over the alien controls. Initially, I plan to recommend conditional sovereignty, a probationary status allowing Earth-limited integration while monitoring your development. And now? Now. She hesitated. I'm recommending full sovereign potential status. Thomas turned to look at her. What changed your mind? Leora's violet eyes met his. You did. Your willingness to help despite danger. Your capacity to accept difference without succumbing to fear. Your species is capable of remarkable adaptation and connection. Something warm bloomed in Thomas's chest despite the cold mountain air. I'm just one human. Not even a particularly important one. Individual actions reveal collective potential, Leora replied. And you? She stopped, apparently struggling to articulate something. Your responses defied statistical models. You chose risk over safety, connection over self-preservation. Such choice-making indicates evolutionary advantages my people had not fully considered. Before Thomas could respond, distant lights appeared on the mountain road below. They found us, he warned, moving back to her side. How much longer? Transmission is encoding, Leora said, working faster. 6 minutes minimum. Thomas scanned their surroundings, spotting a narrow trail leading higher up the mountain. Is there another way out? There's an emergency transport cache 2 kilometers north, Leora confirmed. But the transmission must complete first. If interrupted, everything is lost. The approaching lights grew brighter. Decisions raced through Thomas's mind. They were cornered, outmatched, with nowhere to run until the transmission finished. Keep working, he said finally. I'll buy you time. How? Leora asked, genuine concern in her voice. You're unarmed against advanced technology. Thomas smiled grimly. They want you, not me. And they want you alive to prevent the transmission. I'm just going to create a little confusion about who's who. Understanding dawned in Leora's eyes. That's extremely dangerous. What part of this situation isn't? Thomas shrugged off his jacket, offering it to her. Your coat, please. They quickly exchanged outer garments. In the darkness, with Leora's luminescence dimmed and the hood pulled up, Thomas hoped the disguise might create just enough hesitation to matter. For minutes, Leora said softly as vehicles approached the clearing's edge. Be careful, Thomas. Too late for that, he replied, squeezing her hand briefly before moving toward the forest edge, deliberately making himself visible while keeping his face obscured by her hood. The pursuers took the bait. As Thomas darted between trees, energy pulses lit up the night around him, carefully calibrated not to kill, but certainly to incapacitate. He led them on a spiraling chase, always keeping the clearing in sight while drawing them away from Leora. 1 minute became 2, then 3, his lungs burning with exertion and cold mountain air. A pulse grazed his arm, sending painful tingles through his body. He stumbled but kept moving, determination overriding fear. Just when his strength began to fail, the forest lit up with brilliant blue light from the clearing. Leora's voice called out in a language he didn't understand, the sound carrying unnaturally through the trees. The transmission was complete. Thomas woke to unfamiliar sensations, weightlessness, a soft hum of energy, and the absence of pain where the energy pulse had struck him. He opened his eyes to find himself in a chamber unlike any hospital room on Earth, with walls that seemed partially translucent and technology that defied comprehension. You're recovering well, Leora's voice came from nearby. She moved into his field of vision, no longer attempting to conceal her alien nature. Her luminescence pulsed gently with what Thomas somehow knew was relief. Where are we? He asked, surprised to find his voice steady. A medical bay aboard the council vessel, Leora explained, adjusting something near his bed that made the weightless feeling subside. You've been unconscious for 17 hours while your injuries healed. Memory flooded back, the chase through the forest, the energy pulse, the brilliant blue light. Your transmission got through? Yes, Leora confirmed, her expression warming. Thanks to your intervention. The Resource Territory Faction's agents were recalled immediately for violation of observation protocols. Thomas sat up carefully, testing his limbs. So what happens now? To Earth, I mean. The Council convenes in less than an hour, Leora said, her tone growing formal. My recommendation has been received, but significant debate remains. The Resource Territory Faction has submitted a counter-proposal, arguing that one human's actions cannot represent the species' potential. That's not unreasonable, Thomas admitted. I'm hardly typical. Perhaps not, Leora acknowledged. Which is why I've requested something unprecedented. She hesitated, studying his reaction. I've asked that you address the Council directly. Thomas stared at her in shock. Me? Speak to an alien council about the fate of Earth? I'm a professional companion, not a diplomat. Precisely why your testimony would be valuable, Leora explained. You're neither a political leader nor a scientist, you represent humanity's capacity for adaptation and connection on an individual level. This is insane, Thomas muttered, running a hand through his hair. What would I even say? Leora's expression softened. Whatever truth you feel represents your species best. This isn't about perfect words, Thomas. It's about authentic representation. Thomas took a deep breath, looking around the alien chamber. The magnitude of responsibility settled over him like a physical weight. I don't really have a choice, do I? If Earth's status is on the line. There's always choice, Leora corrected him. You could decline. We could return you to Earth with adjusted memories, and I would defend my recommendation alone. Thomas met her violet eyes, seeing something there he hadn't noticed before, hope, perhaps, or something more complex that transcended species differences. I'll do it, he said finally. But I'll need appropriate clothes. I'm not addressing galactic representatives in hospital pajamas. Leora's face brightened with a smile that was becoming more familiar. Already arranged. The council chamber defied Thomas's expectations. Instead of the sterile, technological environment he'd imagined, the space felt almost organic, a vast circular room with what appeared to be living architecture. Representatives from species more diverse than Thomas could have conceived occupied tiered sections around a central speaking platform. Leora guided him to a waiting area, her formal attire marking her diplomatic status. There are 37 species represented, she explained quietly. Some observe only. 9 have voting rights on Earth's designation. Thomas tried to steady his nerves, adjusting the unfamiliar but surprisingly comfortable garments provided for him. Will I understand them? Will they understand me? Translation is automatic within the chamber, Leora assured him. Speak naturally. Before Thomas could ask more questions, a resonant tone filled the chamber. The council was convening. The proceedings began with formal presentations. Thomas watched as representatives from what Leora whispered were the 3 main factions presented their assessments of Earth. The Resource Territory Faction speaker displayed troubling imagery of human conflicts, environmental degradation, and resource exploitation. The Quarantine Faction emphasized humanity's unpredictable nature and rapid weapons development. Leora's presentation came last, highlighting human creativity, adaptability, and capacity for growth. She spoke of art, scientific advancement, and social progress. Finally, she recounted her experiences with Thomas, their conversations, his reactions to her revelation, and his willingness to help despite personal risk. I present Thomas Reed, she concluded, not as an exception, but as evidence of potential inherent in humanity that warrants sovereign designation. Heart-pounding, Thomas stepped onto the central platform as Leora moved aside. Dozens of alien eyes, some not recognizable as eyes at all, focused on him. I'm not a diplomat, Thomas began, his voice steadier than he expected. Until 3 days ago, I didn't know life existed beyond Earth. I can't speak for all humans, no single person could. We're too varied, too contradictory, too human for that. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Yes, we fight wars. Yes, we damage our planet. Yes, we can be cruel and selfish and short-sighted. The evidence presented against us is true. But it's incomplete. Thomas thought of his own life, the connections he'd made, the kindness he'd witnessed, the growth he'd experienced. What makes us human isn't our technology or our governments. It's our capacity to connect, to form bonds that transcend self-interest. It's our ability to recognize the other as worthy of respect and protection, even when that other is nothing like us. He glanced at Leora, drawing strength from her presence. When I discovered Leora was not human, I was afraid. That's natural. But fear didn't define my response, curiosity did. Connection did. When I learned Earth's future might be at stake, I chose to help not because I expected reward, but because it was right. Thomas took a deep breath. That capacity exists in all humans, in varying degrees. We're works in progress, certainly. But we're progressing. Given time and opportunity, humanity could contribute to this galactic community in ways none of us can yet imagine. He straightened his shoulders, facing the council directly. Judge us by our potential, not just our mistakes. See us as we could be, not just as we have been. We deserve the chance to grow into that potential, as partners, not as resources or threats. Silence filled the chamber when Thomas finished. Then, gradually, a low murmur of discussion spread through the representatives. The central platform lowered, returning Thomas to Leora's side. You spoke well, she whispered, a hint of pride in her voice. Did it make any difference? Thomas asked, suddenly exhausted. We'll know soon. The council deliberations continued for hours, much of it in languages that translated into concepts Thomas could barely grasp. Finally, a representative from what Leora identified as the elder species approached the central platform. The council has reached consensus, the alien announced, its voice resonating strangely. Earth is designated sovereign potential with protected status. Observation continues, but contact protocols are authorized for gradual implementation over the next 50 Earth years. Relief washed over Thomas as Leora explained the implications. Earth would be protected from exploitation while being gradually introduced to the wider galactic community. As the council adjourned, Leora led Thomas from the chamber. You've helped secure your planet's future, she said softly. Few beings can claim such impact. What happens now? Thomas asked, the reality of his situation settling in. He was aboard an alien vessel, impossibly far from everything familiar. To me, I mean. Leora hesitated. Standard protocol would return you to Earth with adjusted memories, your normal life restored. And non-standard protocol? Thomas asked, surprised by his reluctance to return to normal. I've been assigned as Earth's primary contact during the transition period, Leora said carefully. I'll need a human liaison. Someone who understands both worlds, who can help bridge differences. Thomas felt something shift between them, possibility, connection, future. Sounds like a job requiring adaptation and connection, he said with a smile. Fortunately, I have experience in that area. Leora's luminescence brightened. It would mean moving between worlds. Neither fully here nor there. I think I already am, Thomas replied, reaching for her hand, a gesture that now felt natural between them. Besides, I'm curious to see what lies beyond the veil. As their fingers intertwined, Thomas looked out through a viewport at the stars, no longer distant and unreachable, but the beginning of a journey he could never have imagined. The assignment had been simple, do as instructed, no questions asked. But curiosity had led him to a truth that changed everything, not just for him, but for all of humanity.